This presentation is partly by popular demand. UV mapping allows you to precisely place textures on 3D objects, as seen here. Very oftentimes you'll cut seams in the UV map so that your texture will actually fit a model all the way around 360 degrees in all directions. UV stands for the UV coordinates on the 3D plane of the map, which because the texture is always two-dimensional, as opposed to the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the 3D model or object. You don't always have to have a UV map to put textures on a model. I mean, here in Google SketchUp, you can see how you can put textures on each face separately. So that's another approach. It's one of the things that makes SketchUp simpler than Blender or 3D Studio Max, but it has a disadvantage that you can't put signage and things on it. Unity 3D also has a coordinate system that you can manually do with code. If you look here, I've never done this. It's more complicated than a graphical user interface, obviously. This is the interface for UV mapping in Blender. So you select your faces and then you unwrap. So that means that you can produce a model like this that has, different details and different parts of the texture. That means you don't have to model a lot of things, otherwise you would have to. And it looks more realistic, I would argue. This model lacks an interior model, but of course the texture is relatively complete. So you can also see the tires are very detailed. This is because I've done 4 materials with different UV maps. So here the steel and miscellaneous texture is part of the steel and miscellaneous material. So we jump to the UV editing menu and you can see that UV map. And you can edit it, in fact, even after you've marked your seams and unwrapped it. And this makes it very easy to export a UV map image file that you can use to make your textures. So there you can see the export UV layout at the top there. The UV's pull-up menu, actually. And like I said, I have 4 textures for this model. The other detailed one, of course, I mean, we have glass, obviously, and that's not detailed. And I have an all black and otherwise, undetailed parts texture and material. But the tires material is the other complex one. So here, of course, it has a separate UV map. Here I'll call up the proper tires texture to demonstrate it. And you can see how it fits quite nicely. I did have to mark seams on this, as with the body, because otherwise the UV map would overlap on itself. They're round, obviously, so it's hardly any surprise that would be a problem if you didn't mark the seams. So here I'll show some seams. So you can see that marked in red. That wouldn't actually appear in any game or anything like that, but it's a way of navigating the seams in Blender. There, if you deactivate the textures on the model display, you can see them more easily marked in red. Some of those are marked in orange. It depends on the version of Blender you're using, actually. And you can see the tires there too, and the wheels marked out. On the left, you can see what happens if you don't mark seams and you just export the whole model. It overlaps on itself and you can't really use the UV map. On the right, you can see the body UV map. That's the actual one I used to make the textures. This is the mark seam feature, just for reference. Mesh, edges, mark seam. After you've selected the edges you want, of course, and you have to make sure you select all of it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And there you can see the seam again. Now, here I have my image editor, in this case GIMP, and I'm using the layers, and at the bottom I have the UV map. And then, over the top of that, of course, I have the paint and the details. I'm not a very good artist, so this is not the prettiest texture, but it's possible to make it pretty precise because you have the actual UV map image under your texture. So you can paste in photographs like the parking lights there for greater realism. The other advantage of this is that if you have a paint layer, you can do repaints without a whole lot of work. So here I can make the car blue. So I select the blue color, and I use the paint bucket tool in a minute. So I'm sure that works. And I have a blue car now. So I could export this as another texture file, and I have a repainted car model. So that's it. Thank you for watching.